Well, hello, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm your host, David the Skeptic. David the Skeptic, and we're just going to motor on because I'm a professional. Um, so, look, oh God. I hate whoever's done this. I hate you so hard. We are doing our finale of the show, I guess informally titled "Why I Wouldn't Worship." I think the blog post is "Why Worship Doesn't Work for Me." We've got 4 shows, different interviews with skeptics on this very question. Each skeptic has answered uh, some variation of no, they wouldn't worship, although some have tried to cheat by saying yes, they would worship, but when questioned further, it was really a no when it came right down to it. Everyone kind of had a slightly different take and a slightly different answer. Christians, of course, have a problem with all of our takes and our answers. We will give them a chance to interrogate us further and tell us why all of our assumptions and reasons are wrong and why they wish that there was a hell for us to burn in. So before we give it over to them to do that, let's just go ahead and Sarah, you and I are the only ones who have done shows to this point, and I hate to give you the mic first because I could see the train going off the track super early and never getting back on. But if you would maybe just go over, take a minute or two to express why you wouldn't worship, or at least the worship that you would be willing to do that I don't call worship at all.
Oh yeah, okay. So yesterday we spent time. Well, I defined it as any. It doesn't have to just be singing and praising and things like that. It's whenever you show reverence to somebody. So I'm quite happy to give a deity a high five and say you're the big guy here. There's no problem with that. So if that's worship, that's fair enough. I can't remember what my other points were, but and that it may serve a purpose is what I said for humans in terms of taking the focus off us and to something and putting it onto something other than ourselves, whether that's a higher being or just thinking about others. I can see that if you worship yourself, it's probably not a good thing. So I was actually a bit torn as to whether I would be worshipping or wouldn't be worshipping. The kind of old version of God that I believed in, probably not anymore. But I also thought it would be something that came out, that arose naturally and not something you can compel out of people. So that was pretty much my 2 cents worth yesterday amongst a lot of Chinese beers.
Yeah, and let's be clear. Sarah's clearest definition of worship was cacking one's pants. So there's that. Me,
if you're faced with the God of the creator of all things, then I think it's the only sensible thing is to cack your pants. Plus, it would actually be involuntary. So, yeah.
Well, it would be very sincere.
This is the level, guys. This is the level which we were discussing yesterday.
You really need to listen to Sarah's interview if you want to get the full context. I assure you, like so many Christians when they quote the Bible, the full context is not going to make it any different. So, but feel free to listen to it. I apologize for my part in putting that podcast out. Also, I loved every minute of it. I have not, in fact, given a proper answer except what I have written on the blog. So there is a blog post laying this out for those who like to read very long explanations. This one isn't actually very long. It's about 1,500 words, something like that. You can find it at skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com, skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. You can email me directly, skepticsandseekers@gmail.com. I read all of the emails. You can leave a comment if you go to skepticsandseekers.com squarespace.com. Just log into your Discuss account, and I read all the comments that show up on the board. I think that probably a couple of reasons, though, that I can give in short form. Worship cannot be commanded. You can command someone to go through motions, go through ritual, but you cannot command someone to truly worship from the heart any more than you can command someone to love you. And so the moment worship becomes a command, it pretty much guarantees that what comes back is not going to actually be worship. And so I do see worship as being commanded by God, and therefore he is utterly disqualified for the thing. I don't see how it could be done under command. The second part for me, well, in fact, I'll since the second part for me kind of comes with Andrew's answer, I'll um, try to summarize his answer. It would probably be more along the arguments of uh, an evil God objection. He does not see this God as being worthy of worship. And I think that that is a fair objection. Whether God is actually evil or not, you can't simply ignore how a person feels about the God, what they think about the God. So let's say the God is good, but you think God is evil. Well, you cannot and should not worship someone you think is evil. Your opinion of that has to be taken into account. And God, if he wants you to worship him, has to overcome that objection for you. Otherwise, it's impossible. You can't do it, and you shouldn't do it. So I do think that that is a valid argument if the image that you have of the God you're supposed to worship is that he is immoral and monstrous. You've got to correct that image before you can get about the business of discussing worship. Matthew had some good conversation all around. I'm trying to distill his answer into a summary, and it's kind of hard to do. I might come back as I think a little bit more about what Matthew had to say. And Bryan, I am hoping will actually show up on the podcast. So we will. I'm gonna withhold those for a little bit. And the one we have not heard from yet is Darren. And so even though I said that I'm going to throw this over to the Christians for interrogation, before we do that, I would like to just do a very small interrogation of Darren and get his views. And the reason that Darren is different from the rest of us is the rest of us skeptics have been Christians. We've been in the church, some of us for a long time, a major portion of our lives, very seriously involved. Darren is not an ex-gen though. Darren is a never been, and so he's going to have a very different perspective on the idea of worshiping a deity and why he wouldn't worship perhaps than we would. And so I'm going to get to that in just a moment. It looks like Teddy will not be joining us right away. Just looking into the email, she might show up later, or she might just chicken out altogether. We'll see. She'll never listen to this show anyway, so I don't care. So Darren, I have asked everyone a variation of this question, and I'm just going to ask you directly rather than giving it any nuance, because I think that you have I think that I'm more interested in your perspective than anything else. And so just coming straight at it, if the God of the Bible, and by the way, God of the Bible as defined by Teddy,
Specific.
so that's a pretty straightforward God view. I almost said Dale, but that's a little bit more complicated of a God view. Teddy's God view is a lot more accessible, I think. So if Teddy's God turned out to be real and he was real in a way that you know he is real. So we can't equivocate on, whether you really know it, whether you're confident about it. No, skip past all of that. You're as confident about it as you need to be. Would you worship that God? And seeing that the answer is probably going to be no, why not?
Well, I love to disappoint, but actually it would be a yes. I have absolutely no interest in being tortured for all eternity. And Teddy's God is definitely a torture you for all eternity for not worshiping type of God. Now Dale's God is just logically impossible, so it'd be kind of hard to worship that one. But but yeah, Teddy's God is a definite yes for me.
Okay.
In fact,
So,
all the evil gods probably would be a yes just because they're willing to do lots of nasty things to you. All the good gods would be um, probably a no because they just wouldn't ask it of you. I mean, if they're asking of you, then they're just not a good god. Um, at best, they're a sociopath. At worst, they're going to be a psychopath. So,
okay, so we've got an evil god type objection. I would say though that even though I appreciate your answer, I dispute it. I think that you would go through the motions, but I would say that theologically speaking, the motions is not worship. God
well,
rejects the motions.
if the
He calls
if the
for
god
he
is
calls for the heart, a true, broken and contrite heart, not sacrifices.
well, if the god is willing to torture you for not worshiping him, I'm guessing he doesn't really care about your heart. And we're talking about Teddy's god here, not a
Yes.
god that really cares about your heart.
Okay. So okay, I'll leave that for now. I object to your answer. I don't call it worship. I call it going through the motions, and I do think that there are enough Christians who have expressed God views, and I think that even Teddy would express this God view too, that God does care about your heart. But to express this maybe in a way that we could agree on the question, um, remove worship from the question and substitute love. Would you love that God?
Oh no.
Right. And
Uh,
I don't think that you can actually do worship without love.
Well, you can the god could make you love fairly easily. It's just a matter of adding a little bit of dopamine into your brain. And that's easy would be easy enough for a god to do. But as far as whether I would love any god, probably not. Not unless they wanted to play video games with me and we got to know each other.
Okay. Um I hope that we get a chance to talk about love today. Uh After the Christians are done with us, maybe they'll allow us to ask them a few questions that we have, but I'm going to let that stand. Russell and Caleb, uh, you have a little bit of the lay of the land. Um, where are we wrong? Why are we wrong not to want to worship this God?
Caleb, I'll give you the first go ahead if you'd like.
All
I
right.
saw
Yeah.
you over there stewing, so
Yeah. I've been stewing for a while on this. I guess the first issue we really need to kind of get leveled out is what exactly do you mean by worship? Because if our definitions are different, then we're going to be approaching this from different angles anyway. So how exactly would you define this, David?
Okay. I was actually hoping the Christians would define it so that we could be on in a better footing. Because if you tell us what worship is, what it is we're supposed to be doing, then we can answer more directly as to whether we would do that thing or not. So on each of these interviews, I did ask everyone what they thought worship was, and there were some different answers. It wasn't all the same answer. I kind of dodged the question when I answered it by simply saying worship is what you think it is. I don't think that worship is that complicated of an idea. I don't think it's that nuanced of an idea. It's not an academic idea. I think it's pretty meat and potatoes, a pretty meat and potatoes kind of word. And when people hear it, they know exactly what it is and what it means. So I don't think that it means anything more than what people think it obviously means. And I don't think it means any less than what people think it obviously means. In a Christian context, worship is something special that is relegated to their God. For instance, a Christian wouldn't worship some other God, even if some other God existed. They wouldn't worship. They might give that other God some measure of respect, but they wouldn't worship it. So we wouldn't call it respect. I don't know. They might find another God lovable, but they wouldn't worship it. So we can't call it love.
They're being chastised every Sunday for worshipping Mammon.
Right. Yeah. So
that you're not supposed to. That's become a priority, and that you're giving it too much reverence and attention. So I think that Christians do, and they try not to. That's the point.
Yeah, I don't reverence anyone or anything. And I think that worship has something to do with reverence. I don't put people on pedestals that are too high. I mean, I'm a Tom Brady fan. Eat it, New York. Boston. Brady. Anyway, that's but I don't worship him. I don't come anywhere close to worshiping. I think he was the greatest of all time. But I don't
No, but it
worship
was
him.
what we were saying about talents, time, and what was the other one? Talents, time,
talent, and treasure.
And treasure. Yeah, exactly. So if you're putting that into something, time, talents, and treasure. Well, if you're putting a lot of time, talents, and treasure into the pursuit of money, then that is becoming your idol and what you worship and put priority on and seek after and desire. So I think that's what if you look for that and you worship that, you will go after it. And a lot of the time, I don't think it's a good thing to do, but that's what they remind you not to do in church quite often. So
right. And what Sarah's giving you is kind of a negative view of how the church has described worship, in that you shouldn't worship other things. You shouldn't put other things as a priority. But I argued with Sarah about that definition yesterday, because we all have priorities. Not all of them are God. That doesn't mean that we're worshiping simply because our priority at the moment is, getting our kid out of a lake that they're drowning in. That's our priority. Singing songs of praise is not your priority at that time. Are you worshiping your kid at that time? I don't think so. So I do think that there is a particular religious connotation to it. I think it is very bespoke to a particular God. It is high reverence. It involves almost sycophantic praise and a type of devotion that I think is very hard to maintain. But all of these things kind of make up this word worship. And once again, at the end of the day, as we're trying to define it, I think it ultimately means what people think it means.
Except when I give you a definition and you don't like it.
Except Sarah. And Sarah.
Except my definition.
I'm really wondering what people think worship means.
Treasuring God above all things is a form of worship. It's not a point in time. If a child is drowning, it doesn't mean that you haven't got other things to do. But treasuring God above all things is a form of life expression of worship over time, and it's whether you see that arcing narrative throughout your life as to whether you can say you lived a worshipful life or not. It's not just, yeah, you can have other priorities at different times that you have to do. That doesn't mean you're not worshiping God overall.
And the reason
You've got to
Sarah's
accept that
right here-
definition.
the reason
I
Sarah's right
actually
here
think that's a reasonable definition.
is because the
It's,
way she's sitting in that chair, she's owning that chair right there. Look
Yeah.
at us. We're all like face.
Boss.
This, she's like, she's got it to the side there. Yeah, I mean, I think worship has a very wide definition. So we would have to narrow that down, I think, because you say, you gave us this quasi definition, and then Sarah jumped in with another one that was even better, I think. And then you're like, well, it's what most people think it is. And I'm just having trouble distinguishing what you mean by that.
well, being one of the two Christians on the show, why don't you tell us what worship is? Because I suspect if we had 10 Christians on the show, we would get 10 definitions of it.
Well, the reason I have to ask you this, David, is because you're the one that has titled the show and went through 4 separate interviews with a definition in hand. So that's what we're trying to get to first, so we can kind of, okay, well, this is what we think. And
I just gave you that, and I can keep talking for another 30 minutes, but it wouldn't be different.
Because even Darren was like, I will worship a God out of self-preservation. And, there can be a sort of worship in that, so.
But theologically speaking, there isn't. So,
Okay, so
when you say that
is?
worship is an activity devoid of heart, then you may be speaking generically in some way, but you're not speaking theologically. No Christian should accept that definition of worship. And the ones who do don't know their Bible very well, and they don't know the God that they claim to worship.
Okay, Kaleb, what do you think here?
Well, first of all, I think that you need to turn your mic up, Russell. I'm
is
having
it
a
low?
hard time hearing you. Yeah.
All right, hold on. How about now?
It may be a little bit better, but yeah, go ahead and goose it. You got plenty of headroom.
All right. Well, so yeah, Kaleb, go ahead. I just bumped it up as loud as I can.
Yeah, you're good. It's much better when you're closer to it like that. When you were leaning
Yeah.
back, it was very hard to hear you.
All right.
Yeah, so we're getting in here on definitions a little bit, and I would say that my definition of worship is probably it encompasses a lot of the things we've talked about, but it's the bowing the knee before a ruler. If I bow down before a ruler, then my actions following that have to be consistent with that. If my actions are inconsistent with the fact that I have given my dedication to a given ruler, so thinking of it in kind of, old world terms, if I bow down before this king and I go do something for another king, then I am violating that bowing down or that worship. But it's less so in the individual acts, I think, than it is in the humble submission before whatever it may be, whether that's a given ruler, whether that's myself, my own priorities. Does that line up? Because you keep saying that worship is what it is, but does that line up with how you view worship, David?
Yes, I think that is an excellent definition. I think that's the better of the definitions that I've heard, but that's definitely the sort of thing I'm thinking about. It is the bending of the knee and the will. So it's not just the knee. It's total submission to another because that person is so much greater. And I don't buy any of those things, which is, it kind of makes it a little bit hard for me to worship. For instance, I don't bend the knee to a humans. However, if there was someone, I use this example quite a bit. If America, lost a war to someone we thought was evil, but now they're in charge, and they say bend the knee or not or die, I'm bending the knee. I'm bending both knees. I have no problem with that. But
But
I
you
have no
wouldn't do that on a
submission.
cosmic scale.
Well, but no. I would do that on a cosmic scale too, but I would not have any actual submission to that person. I would physically go through ritual that was empty, but worship is not just the knee, it's also the will, it's the heart. And that's what I couldn't do. And without that, the knee is meaningless. It's so what?
But it's
But
that priority again, isn't it? If you say you love your husband or spouse or whatever, there are times when you're not going to feel and want to do certain things, like go and pick them up from the train station, but you'll go and do it anyway because you know that that's what you've kind of signed up for. So it's a bit like you might not want to worship God all the time, but you might do it because you've made that commitment. That made no sense to anybody then.
no, I agree. I think there's levels of worship, if you will. So if you have worship of a supreme deity, this is different than the level of worship you would give to a individual on earth. I say worship because I think we could separate it out into different terms for each of those kind of levels. But in essence, if you really put them all together, they are all worship on some level. So yeah, I agree with what you said there.
Well, it's about this priority thing is what I wanted to link it back to. It's your number one priority to, be good in your marriage. So you go and pick up your husband, even though you don't want to be doing it at that time, and it's not heartfelt, and you may be even a little bit grumbly about it, but it's still putting them first. So in some ways, you're respecting them and worshipping them, if you like. And that's how I view the word worship a bit more than just singing praises and adoration. No, that must be one aspect of it. That's where you have to have the heart bit that feels it a bit more.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there has to be that other aspect to it. So yeah, I think there's a wide chasm when we look at this, a wide range of options when it comes to worship. It's not just one thing; it's a multitude of things into one. So you have acts of service, serving somebody as an act of worship to God. You could be doing it because you want to be like God. So there's there's a lot of things you're doing out of, and I do think David's right on the aspect that there's love involved, because love is a big motivator for it. So I do think that's also encompasses this form of worship that I would have to say is part of the definition.
Yeah. So let me just read this bit of Bible, and Christians can go ahead and call this your weekly Bible reading. Psalm 51, and I'll just read a couple of verses here. Certainly, you do not want a sacrifice, or else I would offer it. You do not desire burnt offerings or burnt sacrifices. The sacrifice God desires is a humble spirit. O God, a humble and repentant heart you will not reject. Um, this is worship. And once again, if all you show up to the party with is bowing and scraping, you haven't worshipped. You can show up with a um, goat to put on the altar. You haven't worshipped. Um, the God of this Bible that we're talking about cares about the condition of your heart. And so if you're defining worship in some way, that allows you to do that without your heart being involved. You are not talking about any worship that I was familiar with as a Christian and that I accept now. However, if your question is, if your definition simply is, would you go through the motions? Sure, no problem. But I don't actually think that's what Christians are talking about.
So what you're saying is that you could go through any motions if you knew the God of the Bible was real. You could go through whatever motions you had to give the impression of worship, but you can't be in a place where your heart is really in it. Is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying, and I could be wrong. It could be that that situation comes up and my heart is overwhelmed with genuine worship. I don't know, but answering it right now, today, knowing the condition of my heart and mind and what I believe to be the case about this God that Christians say is real, I don't believe that I could.
Okay, so if we were to set that aside for a minute, and let's say God is made in David Johnson's image.
I
So-
definitely couldn't worship him then.
You couldn't.
No,
You couldn't worship a God made in your own image. So
absolutely not.
with the same kind of priorities, the same kind of goals, the same kind of morals that you have, even if that God was a replica of you, you would not worship him.
No, I don't know who the comedian was who said it, but it's actually a very interesting thought experiment. I wouldn't join a club that allowed people like me in it. So, no, I definitely would not worship a God who looked exactly like me. First of all, I don't need such a God. I'm here. Here I am. Why would I even need to externalize me to worship? Furthermore, I don't worship me. So I don't see why I would worship another person who is like me. So yeah, no, you've actually made it a less interesting question for me by putting it that way. Because
And
if I
God's
were
gotta
going to
be-
worship that kind of God, I would just worship myself, and I don't.
And and a God needs to be at least one up from us. Otherwise, what's the point? That's not a God. Why would you worship it? There's no
I don't know.
need
I'd be perfectly happy worshiping myself.
Do you worship yourself now?
Well, I have respect. I give myself time and priority. So I meet most of the definitions of worships that have been put forth. I love myself
Do you ever put anyone above yourself?
sometimes.
Then you're not much of a God. Sorry, you're already disqualified because
that's
no one is above God.
Well, that's just the definition of love, though, right? You're putting other people above yourself. I mean, isn't that, if God was actually loving, wouldn't that be what he did instead of demanding everyone worship him and be under him?
You see, I don't know. I don't. I feel uncomfortable making the rules for worship because what I know of worship is, theologically speaking, I think a fairly correct view from a Christian perspective. I think it's obscene. I don't want worship when it has been offered to me, and I don't want to give it to anybody. I find the whole enterprise extremely uncomfortable and unnatural.
Why don't the Christians tell us why they worship?
Well, no, okay, yes, I definitely want to hear that, but I'm still curious about. I mean, are you satisfied definitionally? Do we have some agreement that worship also involves the heart? It's not just a series of activities and rituals.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Caleb?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
on board with that.
And so then it really becomes a question, since I could go through the activities and rituals, and Darren has said that he could go through the activities and rituals, and Sarah would actually have the hardest time going through the activities and rituals because she would never sing. She would lip sync and
I'd
try to
lip
get away with
sync.
that. But most of us would go through the activities and rituals, then I think the real problem is what would it take to move our hearts in the place where it would need to be? And that's a really tough and interesting question, but I don't think that we can be dinged for the condition of our heart. You know, you can say that, you know, you've formed an arranged marriage for me. Let's pretend that I was married, and you know, the only thing that I have to do is love the person that you've arranged. Well, I don't love the person that you've arranged. I don't even know them. How am I supposed to it takes time to actually fall in love with a person. Um, and you're saying that a prerequisite to the marriage is you've got to love them. Well, that's impossible and absurd. And that's what it sounds like when Christians say, well, you've got to worship God from the heart. I don't even know him. I don't know the guy. And so in our hypothetical situation, we learn that he's real. Maybe he appears to us. Well, his appearing to us doesn't mean that we know him. And so we still have no foundation on which to love and worship, even at that point. Does that make sense?
Except that worship is also defined as the act of communing with God. So you would worship to get to know God.
Oh, you're getting to know
Yeah.
me, or you're worshiping me?
No,
Good.
but Christian,
Thank you.
no, but
Because I reject it.
Right, but if God actually shows up, the problem you're working with right now is that you're working from a paradigm where God just never shows up. But if in
well,
our
that's the problem
hypothetical,
with it.
if in your hypothetical, God actually is showing up, so you actually would be able to form a real relationship with him.
Right, but we would have to form the relationship. So if he shows up and says, I need you to worship me, I can't do it.
Well, what if
So-
he says you need to worship him after knowing him for like 50 years?
Then we can talk about that. We'll have to see how that relationship goes after 50 years. Right? Because because we could get to know him and not like him. Right? I mean, that's a possibility. And if what you're saying is you need a pre-commitment from us that we would definitely worship him, then I think that you're asking for something that is not sensible.
I think I would actually agree with that. I think that would be nonsensical to ask that, because I think there's two very different definitions of love too that we need to flesh out. You have Disney love, which is spontaneous, love at first sight kind of love that you're obviously not going to have in an arranged marriage or that sort of thing usually. However, you also have this other definition of love, which is much more what I would define it as, which is a series of consecutive choices that move you closer to someone. It's acting in a way that is beneficial to them and in a way that is selfless instead of selfish. So I think those are two very different types of love. And it seems like we might be conflating the two here, because I agree. I think that the Christian's journey is one that is constantly evolving and hopefully bringing them closer to God, versus one where it's like, I just love God just because there's nobody else for me to love.
So
Yeah, I'd
let me
have to
respond to
agree
that
with
real
that
quick,
too.
because I think that's a very insightful comment. But no, you mentioned Disney love, and I would like to cite a different version of Disney love, Beauty and the Beast love. So Beauty and the Beast is a scenario where a woman is captured and held prisoner, and by the beast.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yes, and so he needs her to fall in love with him. And he won't let her go because he has a particular need and he's got to do it. And so this story kind of works out where she does fall in love with him, but one should actually cringe at the Beauty and the Beast scenario. Um, one should not applaud that. And as much as I say that, I really loved the latest the live action uh, Beauty and the Beast. Uh, it was it was fantastic. It was well told. That said, the very aspect of it, the very theme of the movie, should make one shudder um, with discomfort, and that feels like the Christian relationship to God. So it's where you are told that, hey, there is this God and he has offered a marriage proposal to you. And by the way, if you don't accept it, there will be some version of hell, whatever that is, annihilation, burning in fire, somewhere in between. Um, and so now you have to love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Go. And the Christian is like, well, okay. Okay, I love you. And they there may be some fake it till you make it aspect there. There may be some, but it's still kind of gun to the head. I'm going to put you in this room until you love me, and I'm going to put myself in situations and try to hack my brain so that I can love you. And that seems to be a little bit warped to me. If God was introduced to me in a slightly different way, without some threat of torture or punishment, and just wanted to get to know me and let the relationship go where it went, I'm open to that. And it might end up being a very strong love relationship, or it might be a hate relationship. I don't know. I can't prejudge it, but I'm certainly open to a real relationship. I'm not open to the idea of we're all thrown in this cage and we're told to love God or die.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would have to agree with most of that. I think I don't have a problem with it on that. And you're right. I mean, some Christians do view it that way. And I mean, I don't think I do. I think it's more like, there's this. I do believe there's a loving relationship that comes from knowing God, and you do draw closer to God as you go, and that's even couples with sanctification and so forth and stuff like that. So I wouldn't. It's kind of dynamic. It's not just formal in its practice. So I would have to say that there's a dynamic aspect to being a Christian, and unfortunately, some people don't view it that way. But I mean, I do, and that's how I try to live my life, and I try to reflect it the best way I can.
Do you get
Okay.
anything out of worship? Do you find it helpful?
I do. I do. I think there's I believe in a growing relationship with God. I get closer to him as I do. I believe that there's like
What
Dave
does
said,
that
there's an
mean?
aspect that he makes me a better person inside and so forth. But yeah, I mean, what else would you like? What do you want me to piggyback off of to say more on? What would you like me to expound on?
Well, just
Well,
what
go ahead.
does it serve? What purpose does it serve?
Well, I
Why do you
think
do it?
one
How do you
is,
mean draw closer to you? I mean,
yeah,
most worship
it's
songs are
kind of
just being
foreign. Yeah, it, it's
well, it's
it's
just reminding you how big he is, how great he is, how this he is, how that is, and it's like, oh no, I did that week one,
yeah,
and
and
just
yeah.
keep.
Well, there's a lot that you can get illumination for, right? So I mean, you look at these big aspects, but as you're doing it more and as you're walking in your Christian life, there's more illumination. You get to know more of his character, whether through stories or whether through uh, uh, reading the Bible, through the stories that I was just mentioning. Sorry, I might be getting low again. But the idea of illumination, getting closer to God, making yourself better, giving him the credit he's due because he is God. I think that there is that aspect as well in worship. So yeah, I think there's a lot you can gain out of it by simply just communing with God. And there's ways you can commune that aren't maybe communicative. It's not like verbal. I
How
think
do
it's
you
wrong to
commune with
place.
God in a
I think it's wrong to say that communication is the only way to commune. I don't think that's the case.
well, but how do you commune? Isn't communing with someone a two-way thing? So, I if I said I had an invisible friend, um, I don't know that it could be properly said that I commune with them. I may talk to them and I may think thoughts at them, but at some point, communion is a two-way thing. And so I take it that there's some kind of mystical aspect that the Christian gets from worship that one would not get just by going through the motions.
Yeah, I was looking at Wind at the Door not too long ago, and I was also looking at uh, Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis, and they do a lot with communion. There's a lot that is integrated there with communion and communications. I would refer you to that to just maybe get a sense of not just applying our 20th century modes of communication with God and so forth, but I think sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Um, and I think sometimes stories have the ability to mediate a presence. So I think we have to break that down and have to look at the different forms of communion that are possible. And I think there is way more than just one mode. So has God communicated verbally with some people in the past? I believe he has. I believe Jesus came to earth, and I believe he was God. He showed up, and people hated him for it. So I mean, I think that was a way he communicated with us as well. So now I think there's the Holy Spirit in the Gospels. So
Doesn't the very fact that he showed up and people hated him sort of demonstrate that he's not worthy of worship?
no, I think it demonstrates that men love darkness rather than they love light.
How does that follow?
Well, I mean, I think we are selfish people that are
Okay, well,
ultimately
but God comes down as Jesus and people hate
mhm.
Jesus. How does it follow that people like darkness better than light from that?
Well, because I think he is the self personification of God. So I think that uh
Right, but you're also
we're
assuming that
also
God is good and worthy of
yeah,
worship.
I
But
am.
if but
I
if
am.
but
Yeah,
if we do
I'm
this
assuming he
experiment
is.
where people actually get to know God through Jesus and they don't like him, then isn't that evidence that your initial hypothesis that he's worthy of worship is kind of off?
No, because I think that men love darkness rather than they love light. I mean, I think that's a
Well, right, but
contradiction.
that's
But
more
yeah,
special
but that
pleading than anything else because you're
no,
assuming
no,
your
it's not.
conclusion.
Well, there's a lot of assumptions going into this right now. This is a hypothetical situation, so we're looking at hypotheticals here.
If
We're
men
trying to
love
say
darkness
from
more than light, then how
the
does
Christian
anyone ever come to
theology.
worship? How
If
does anyone ever come to worship?
do you know the theology of regeneration and
I
having
know
having
many theologies of
what is it called,
regeneration that
prevenient
are often
grace and
conflicting.
so forth, prevenient grace and so forth. Yeah, I think we would be amiss if we don't go through the reasons of how this process takes place. And
Okay,
whether
but you
you
can't
buy it
you
or
can't
not,
just throw
I
out men
no,
love darkness more than light but we
I can
Christians love light.
if we're talking from this as God being existent and our theology is true and he's worthy of worship in context to the entire beginning of the debate. Would you worship him if he was actually existed? And you're coming at it from the Christian perspective. At least I know David is. Then yeah, I think I do have the right to say that
I
because
Well,
we're
not
think that
really
I,
assuming that
because
the theology
because
is true.
right, but but that's the question is whether the theology that you're espousing is true. The only thing we're assuming is true is that God exists. And
Well, not really.
And if
I mean,
Jesus comes
Darren, that's
down
not
and
true.
people don't like him, then
No,
that
no, Darren, that's
indicates
not
that your
true.
theology might be off.
Yeah, Darren, that's not true though. I mean, we're talking about the God, and David's not letting people equivocate here. He's saying the God that you present, and you guys have presented the Christian model. Not you, Darren. I'm not saying you have, and you have a very valid question if that's not the case. However, if that's the case, if this is where David Johnson is coming from, and where Sarah may be coming from, I don't know if she is, but if that's where they're coming from, but yeah, I do think I'm justified in that.
Well, to be fair, I've asked the interviewees different questions because they're different people. And so some I have asked them to imagine the best version of the Christian God, the best version they've heard. Others I've had answer, well, the best version of the Christian God that they can imagine, whether they've heard of him or not. And then others, a very specific version of the Christian God, because I've tried to get a little bit of variety in the answers to see if it made any difference or not. But I actually just want to go back a half step and challenge the notion that God came to earth and people rejected him. This is a thing that preachers like to say from the pulpit to try to make a point, but it's a bad point, and I don't think it really holds up. So even if the Christian story is true, Jesus did not come to earth proclaiming that he was God come to earth. That simply isn't how the story reads. In fact, most people he encountered would not have known he was God incarnate. And it seems like for a significant portion of his ministry, when he did do something special, he gave people orders not to tell anybody. So that was very secretive, and people did not know who he was. So this is a very different scenario than what we're talking about. We're talking about God coming and actually showing up as God, announcing he's God, proving he's God in such a way that everybody knows. That's not the story of Jesus, and I don't think that's a fair comparison.
Nor did they necessarily not like him. They just found some of the thing what he was saying was challenging and or not in line with their cultural understanding, like the Pharisees and things. They had a different understanding. You can't blame those poor people for thinking a certain way. That was their religion. And so the fact that Jesus said things that upset them is just kind of, well, God needs to deal with that. That's just take it on the chin. That's how people have evolved and operate. And so I don't, and it doesn't say they didn't like Jesus. They just found some of what he said a bit off of what their normal beliefs were.
They didn't
Yeah,
think that
they
Jesus
didn't
was
think he
God
was.
any more than
Yeah.
we think Satya Sai Baba is the
Yeah, but he committed
reincarnation of.
blasphemy. He claimed to be God, and you're looking at this
Right, but
from
they
the perspective.
they
Are
hated
you
him
gonna let me?
because he claimed because
Okay.
he was blasphemous,
Okay.
not because he was God. They didn't
Well,
hate him
if you're
because he
going to
was
interrupt
God. They
me
didn't know he was
at
God.
every point, then I'm not going to be able to give you a
I can
cogent
barely hear you.
explanation.
Honestly, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, they
You're
can't hear very much.
yeah, you're barely coming across.
All right. So how about now?
That's better.
All right. So my whole thing is, if you're not going to let me answer cogently, you're going to interrupt every time I try to give an explanation.
Well,
And I
sure.
can't really give you a cogent answer on this. So are
Okay,
you going
so
to? Yeah.
please respond that because the scenario that you're saying that Jesus that God came to earth and we rejected him, I reject because God didn't come to earth in a way that people knew was God, and those people who just thought he was some crazy dude pretending to be God, um, he could have made it very clear to them, and he didn't. There were times when he purposely let crowds of people misunderstand what he was saying and misunderstand him without making the correction because he had prejudged that they weren't they their hearts weren't right anyway. And so this idea that God did come and we rejected God is fallacious. God
Well,
didn't
I don't
come
think
if
it
he came
is.
in disguise.
I don't think he did. I think that he revealed himself in the appointed time, just like he says in the Gospels. And he said, "Don't tell anybody," but that was until there was an appointed time, and then he revealed himself. He would say, before Abraham was, I am. There's no bigger declaration than that. So if you're
Only
gonna
in
go
John's
off the
gospel.
yeah,
No, only
yeah,
in John's gospel.
if we're gonna go off of the gospels, if we're gonna assume the gospels are legit, I mean, of course, that's a whole different argument. But if
Yeah,
we're going
well.
off of the gospels existing and being legit, then we have to take in consideration everything that comes with it. So
Right.
yes,
David Koresh also said that he was the
that he
Christ, the
didn't reveal
Messiah.
himself? Yes,
There,
there was a time he didn't reveal himself, but there
okay,
was a time where he did step and he did reveal himself.
but
And
he
then
he
backed
didn't
it
reveal
up by
himself in a
miracles.
way that was
Yeah, he
convincing
did.
to
He
enough
rose people
people.
from the dead. He rose people from the dead. He calmed storms. He controlled nature. You know, I mean, what other proof do you need if those gospels are legit?
Well, the other religions have the same stories, though. So it's not like those stories were unique or he was the only one doing it. As far as the old people knew,
Well, I mean,
there were lots of people
what
doing the same
stories?
things.
Like what? Like what stories?
Apolloneus.
Apollonius.
Take any religion,
I
the
would-
ancient religions, Zoroastrian, any of the Native American ones, any of the Egyptian ones, any of the Greek or Roman
India.
ones, India, any of those, and you've got all those same stories. So it's not like Jesus was doing unique and
Okay.
special things. Those kind of stories were all over the place.
Yeah, but we're not arguing from that point of view. We're arguing from a point of view that he showed up and the gospels are legit. Okay, so
Right, but even if
Sure.
yeah,
but if there's
but if
stories all
he's
over the
doing
place, you're saying
okay,
that
there's
these stories
stories.
prove that he was
We're not assuming those
real, but
stories are true. We're not assuming those stories are true. We're assuming that the gospels are true.
Okay, but even assuming
It
the
doesn't
gospels
matter.
are true,
Yes, it does. If
he
he's
didn't
actually
show
doing
up.
those events, if he's
but
actually doing these events in front of people in history, they have a legitimate cause.
No, they don't.
The people
And
in
Yes, they do.
Israel, the people
Yes,
in
they
Israel
do.
did not accept him as God. They didn't believe he was God. He
yeah,
clearly was not convincing to the people
His
who
own
lived there
brother.
in that time and place.
that
So
the
I'm
brother
sorry, it's
did
not like he
believe it.
showed up as God and they rejected God. They rejected Jesus as a claimant for being God,
Yeah.
but they didn't reject what in their minds was God. And that's what I'm trying to get at. God didn't come in a way that convinced people he was God and then they rejected him. That's not true. That's a false narrative. I have not
and
rejected
I
God.
don't think so. But I mean,
and the problem
man
is even if
did
we
what he-
accept the gospels as being true, that doesn't mean that anyone has a justification for actually believing them, because there were so many other stories of other people doing the same thing. Even if all those other stories are false, they still existed. So people had no way to distinguish a false story from a true story. And that's the problem. It doesn't matter if they're true or not.
Well, I mean, part of that comes down to how close they were written to the events they're describing. And, you know, we've got time for legends to develop in a lot of these cases.
Like the
Well, we know that
Gospel of
legends
John.
can
If it's
develop
true.
very
But
quickly.
even if it's
right?
true, those people would be justified, because you don't know if they heard other stories. They were witnessing this, so of course they could be justified.
Well,
that's
not everybody witnessed that. In fact, Jesus,
Very
when he
few did.
returned, he returned to very few and a very select group, and it seemed like he was more interested in people having
fine.
faith that he risen rather than having an actual encounter with him.
But the fact is that those people would the few people, or however many it was, would be justified in believing in who he was.
Okay,
Right, but the vast
I
majority
wouldn't be
of people aren't.
justified. Right, even the vast majority of people in that time.
What's the point there that they didn't, because they rejected him? Of course, that was my whole point. They rejected.
But no. But they rejected
God
Jesus
showed up
as
and
they
they
rejected
rejected him.
Jesus as God. They didn't reject God.
In other words,
Yeah, they didn't reject
it doesn't
God.
matter. It doesn't really matter, because people believe what they want to believe. There's
Caleb, do you at
studies
least
on
see the
this
point that I am
all
trying
throughout.
to make? If you're God, Caleb, and I reject you, and I don't know that you're God, I didn't reject God. I rejected you.
I see the point you're trying to make, but I also see what Russell's getting at here, and I'm not sure I have a better way of explaining it. Aside from the fact that I do think Jesus made very clear declarations that equivocated himself with God in
So
some
David
way, and maybe
Koresh.
maybe people understood that, maybe they did not, but he equivocated himself with God, and people did reject that. They rejected that he claimed to be God. And I think that's what you're trying to get at.
Yes, they'd rejected the claim.
Yeah, there are currently like 3 people that I know of alive today that claim to be Jesus reborn. Do you believe them? Because
no,
if
I
you
don't
don't,
have any evidence to support that.
right,
Right. And also, it doesn't fit
that's
with
the
your
point.
narrative, and it
The
didn't fit
people
with
in the
theirs
past
either.
didn't
Not
have
the
any
point.
evidence to
That's
support
not the
that
point.
claim.
That's not the point. If the
It's
people
my point.
if the few that were there saw what he was doing, and this was my whole point. We're going back to where these people saw this stuff. They would have justification to believe it. Period.
But yeah, the handful of people that actually saw it, sure.
That
But what
actually-
about
yeah, that's what
the
I'm
hundreds
talking-
of
that's
other people
all I
that
was
didn't?
talking about. That's all I was talking about.
Yeah,
Right,
well,
but
a
you're
handful
saying
of
that
people
everyone
accepted
rejected
him.
God when they didn't
I'm saying
reject
that
God.
he
They're
came to
rejecting
his
the
own,
stories
and
that
they
are being
re-
told about
they-
him.
They rejected him, and he did miracles in front of the people that did reject him.
So
The
do you
Sanhedrin were
think that
there
I have
at
rejected God?
Lazarus's tomb? You know,
Do you think that I have rejected God?
of course.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I
why
have.
do you think I have rejected God?
I don't know. I'm not in your psyche.
No. I mean, what makes you think that I have rejected God?
I don't
Because
know.
to me, I haven't
David, I
rejected
really
God.
don't know. I don't really know.
No. You're. I'm not asking you about my motives. I'm asking why you believe that I have rejected God. I'm telling you, I have not rejected
Well,
God.
David, I would like to know your motives before I make.
No,
a prejudgment.
I have not rejected God. You
Yeah,
can't. You're not hearing me. I have never been introduced to a God to reject. I reject your characterization.
You
I reject a lot of the
Christianity.
Christian stories, but God has not showed up to me in a way that I could accept or reject him. I have never rejected God.
Say the same. Yeah.
But you reject worship of any God, even one made
In
in
my
your own image.
in my current state right now, I do. But once again, I can look.
But he was also a Christian
Daddy-
for a lot of years, so he was willing to worship.
I think I worshipped probably what I would consider an idol today. This idea of God that I had. So let's be clear. I can tell you what I think I would do now, facing the God that Christians describe to me. But I have never encountered this God for myself. So I might become a gibbering idiot at that point. My mind might break into a million pieces. I might become a worshiper of the highest order. I don't know, but I can tell you what I think based on the Christian God that people describe. But I have never had the opportunity to reject God. And the fact that Russell believes that I have rejected God suggests that he does not really understand the atheist story at all.
All right, you hit me with a question that was kind of like a trip you up question. So you came at me, oh, am I rejected God from a certain point of view, from the theistic outlook that I have and that you've described? Then yes, that's what I meant. But if you're looking at this from some other point where like, okay, because I don't believe that the real God ever showed up, then of course I'm going to agree with you.
Okay, well that's what I've been trying to yell away at you for the last 20 minutes.
Yep,
I've
and
been
that's the
telling you
distinction.
that.
And that's the distinction where we're trying to make when you're saying that when you said that all the ancient people loved darkness more than they loved God. They never met God. They can reject
No.
him because they never met him, and they didn't believe the
That's not the
stories about him
gospel narrative.
because there
That's
were
not
so
the
many other
gospel
stories
narrative.
going around.
But that's not the gospel narrative.
But that is the gospel
no,
narrative.
it's not.
The
It
Jews
is
didn't
not.
think Jesus was
you
God. The
Again, you
Pharisees
cut
didn't
me
think he
off.
was
Every
God.
time I try to give an answer, you cut me off. All right. So, like, are you going to let me answer? Or are you going to cut me off?
Well, I don't know. Give it a try. We'll see how the Spirit moves me. Okay. What I was saying is that the Jews did not
Yes,
reject
they did.
Jesus.
He
They
did it
did.
in
They
front of
did
him.
not
The
accept
people that-
Jesus.
The people that were on in Palm Sunday, laying the palms down, calling him Hosanna, were the same people that crucified him. He did the miracles in front of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was at Lazarus's tomb. Okay. Now, will we see the first miracle in Cana? No, people weren't around. That was a story. Why was it a story? Because Jesus said, hey, this is before my time. Right? But not at the time where he's arguing with the Pharisees and saying, hey, look, I am that I am. And boom, I'm raising people from the dead. I'm walking through crowds. When I say I am he, people fall down. So those are the bunch that crucified him. They
Okay,
had plenty of
lots
opportunities.
of people
that's the gospel
were
narrative
messiahs
for
at that time. There were many
but there
false
weren't that were
messiahs that
actually
came up.
speaking and knocking people down or raising people from the tomb or doing miracles right in front of their faces that they have pretty much no excuse. That's how the gospel sets these miracles
There
up.
were
And the
many
people
wonder
that saw
workers in that
those-
time. I'm sorry, there were
Oh
many
my gosh,
miracle
okay.
workers in that time.
Who?
Mi-
Who? Do you have any other specific Galilean
Yes.
person? Who?
Simon the sorcerer.
Simon the sorcerer was not during that time. And if he was after Christ, I think.
By a few years, it was
no.
definitely during that
But
time.
he
They
wasn't actually
believed.
doing real miracles.
Okay, well now you're just sorting between real miracles and what people saw as tricks. People thought that there were sorcery and power and men of wonder during that time.
Okay, so let's go to where Simon.
Jesus was one of them. He wasn't the only one.
Let's see where Simon the sorcerer is. Caleb, do you know that verse? Are you familiar with it? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's going to be in Acts 13, maybe.
Yeah, doesn't Elijah raise someone from the dead as well?
Oh, the Old Testament is full of people with power. And then there were bad guys with power too, because there were people who could do witchcraft. There was the one slave girl who could do necromancy. The Bible's full of that kind of. This is New Testament, by the way, the last one. The Bible's full of that. People having people that could do things that they considered magic was fairly common. Jesus was not uncommon for that. And he was also not uncommon for people calling him Messiah, because there were many Messiahs. History is littered with their bones, just like Jesus's bones, I might add. No, you're not actually saying anything that would make the Jews of that time say, "Oh, well, this guy though, he's the real thing."
Or the Jews of today, which is another problem, I think. They don't even buy it, even now.
They don't even practice the way Judaism was in the first century, anyway. So
okay, but let's not try to throw shade on Jews.
I'm not throwing any shade on anybody. I'm just stating the fact.
Okay, well let's not say Jews don't even know how to do their own religion. That's kind of an ad hominem.
No, that's a David assumption based on what I said. I said that.
Yeah, I'm sick and tired of Christians saying mildly anti-Semitic things about Jews and how they worship, and they know how to worship.
David, their religion has changed. It's a fact.
They'll
tell you that.
Their religion has gone through changes, just like Christianity has gone through changes. But to say that they're doing it wrong somehow, you're not in a position to say that.
I didn't.
Okay, then don't imply it.
I said they're doing it. I never implied it. You're assuming that I implied it. So all I said was they've changed. What is wrong with that?
Okay, that's not what you said. But
that is what I said. I said the religion has changed since they don't even practice.
Well, it's different. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I said.
Which is different. Quite possibly.
Well, yeah, you said they don't even practice their own religion.
No, they don't practice it the way they did in the first century. It's
okay, well,
exactly what I said. This is
right,
the
but even the
people you have when you jump onto people as they're finishing a sentence and you interrupt them with an assumption.
Right, but the point doesn't even really matter, because the Jews in the first century didn't accept him either, and I'm assuming they practiced their religion the same way that Jews practiced in the first century.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. They have practiced the way they've always practiced in the first century.
So the majority of people who were around Jesus in his time did not believe he was God. They did not reject God. They were not in their minds rejecting God.
They did.
No, but not in their minds. And if he was God and they didn't know he was God, then God should have done a better job at appearing so that they would know it. But for you to say that they rejected God...
That's assuming that they would believe anyway.
I'm sorry, to assume that they were rejecting God, and especially when I hear Christians say specifically that the Jews rejected God, that is very anti-Semitic. I won't stand for it. It's not true. The Jews did not reject God. They rejected the idea that Jesus was God.
Well, there were religious leaders within the Jewish community that rejected Jesus, whether it was for his blasphemy. It's pretty clear, if you accept the Gospels, that it was because of his blasphemy by comparing himself with God that they rejected him
I don't
for
deny
that
that.
reason.
Right,
I
but they
don't
still
deny that. In
worship
fact,
God.
you're making my point for me. They thought that it was blasphemy because they didn't think he was God. Now, if they thought he was God and they rejected him anyway, then you could say they rejected God. But the
But
Jews,
at the
but the
same
Jews weren't
time,
some evil satanic cult who were going against God. That is not what they were doing. They were trying to uphold what they understood as good worship for God.
right, right. No, I agree with that. But there were also everyone that, or most of the people, at least in the early part of Jesus's ministry, that accept him were also Jews. Jesus himself was a Jew.
Right, but
Yes, and
most of the
you
people that
had different
accepted,
sects of Jews.
right, but most of the very first Christians were actually Gentiles rather than Jews. The because Paul spread the religion through the Gentile community, not the Jewish one, and Jews still worship God.
Well,
So you
that's not
can't say
true.
that
I mean,
you
that
can't
that
say they rejected God while they're still worshiping God. I mean, that's
yeah,
just
but
logically impossible.
if you're looking at Paul's letters, they're written to Jewish believers. Romans, for example, is all about Gentile inclusion, not just no. There's the early church was heavily Jewish. I mean, you had branches break off even from that. So I mean,
If you look at the heat map of how Christianity spread, it spread through the Gentile lands, not through the Jewish
yeah,
lands.
yeah, but they targeted Jewish synagogues throughout the ancient world, and they were all over the place. The Jews were in Rome. The Jews were all over
Yeah,
Thessalonica.
but they
They
were
were
a
in
very
Macedonia.
small portion of the population. In order to get that kind of growth, you needed to have Gentiles. You couldn't do it with just the Jews.
Well, I'm saying Gentiles were included, obviously, but you're saying the first believers were mostly Gentiles. I'm saying no, not at first. I
Yeah,
mean,
Well, no,
if you look at the
looking at
population,
you're
the
historically
first
wrong, Russell. I'm sorry.
thousand,
It's a
the
little bit
first few
like,
thousand believers that came in Acts were Hellenized Jews.
yeah,
So I mean, there's
you're
not it's not historical. That's a historical fact. It was birthed
right,
out
but you're
of
still inaccurate. Let me explain why. With an
okay.
analogy, analogies tend to go south on me, but I'm going to give it a try. Does everyone on the panel and in the audience remember the original iPod uh, put out by Apple? The original Apple iPod. Um, I had one of those. Click wheel. It was an MP3 device. At any
Yes.
rate, it became one of the most successful consumer electronic devices of all time, and it started out as a Mac only accessory. It was not successful as a Mac only accessory because the Mac market share was so small. The iPod didn't really become the iPod until it went Windows. That's when, there you go. Very good. I had one of those too. The iPod became successful. It gained a majority stake when it went Windows. This is similar to the Jewish Gentile thing. As a Jewish sect, it was a very minority among the Jews. And I think it would have probably died out as a Jewish sect. Paul saved it. I don't think that we would have. I don't think we'd be talking about Christianity at all had Paul not come along and successfully sold it to the Gentiles. But to say that no, it was originally, it spread wildly as this Jewish thing is simply not the case. Yes, it originated among a minority group of Jews, but it didn't actually become a going concern until it was picked up by the Gentiles.
I'll let Caleb jump in here.
Well, yeah,
I've been
I
hogging the
think
mic.
we're definitely talking about different periods of history, because I agree with you, but still, that was Christianity, even when it was among the Jews. To say this isn't really Christianity until it came to the Gentiles as well takes things, I think, too far to say. I mean, they believe the same things
I
that we
agree
see
with
Paul
you,
teaching the Gentiles.
but I don't think it was the same. So I do agree that I could take that point too far, but it was a different religion of sorts, and you can see that in the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15. There were a lot of major disputes between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, and in Paul's writings, he's constantly dealing with those differences. Um, and the more Jewish Christians ultimately lost because they've been the minority anyway. So yeah, originally it was a Jewish sect, but let's be clear, it was a very minority part of a Jewish sect, and it quickly outgrew its Jewish roots, and it did become a different kind of animal when it became Gentile. So the Christianity today is no more that original Jewish sect than Judaism is what it was when Moses instituted it.
Yeah, you can see that most blatantly when you go look at all the other Christian sects that popped up around the same time. There's I think there's like a half dozen that we know about and another half dozen that we suspect just from other writings. And some of them were completely different than what we have right now. I mean, I think one of them actually didn't even have Jesus ever coming down bodily. Everything in the Gospels happened in some other plane of existence. So I mean, it's not like they were even similar. They were very different in a lot of ways.
So let's take a quick poll. By the way, very vigorous, excuse me, conversation. I didn't expect that particular line of conversation. I enjoyed that line of conversation. Caleb, I would like to hear from you more. You're a smart guy, and your microphone is working well, so you should you should use it. The straw poll that I would like to take among the three atheists on the panel, because I made some statements. Sarah joined in a minute ago, but I want to make a clearer statement if I can. I have not rejected God from my perspective. Sarah, have you rejected God?
Not at all. When I wrote my story in the Still Unbelievable book, I finished it with, the door's open. If you're around, if you want to, if it's important to you to connect, feel free.
Darren, have you
So-
rejected God?
Which one?
David Russell's God.
Which one's his again?
Dale's God.
Well, Dale's God is logically impossible,
Dale's God.
so
Yeah.
I guess so, technically.
Dale's God. No.
I can tell
Dale's
you,
God
Nell,
is a maths God. It's just a maths teacher in disguise.
I believe that Matthew would say he has not rejected God. I know that Andrew, because I talk to Andrew about this sort of thing all the time, would say he has not rejected God. Bryan with a Y.
Why aren't you here?
He tried to trip me up the other day, but I think that he would say that he has not rejected God. In fact, he was the one who answered, "Yes, I would worship." So I don't buy the accusation against most. Obviously, I haven't polled most atheists. Skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. Go to the board, skeptics. Have you rejected God in your heart? Never mind anyone else's definition of that. Do you believe that you have rejected God? I want to know. Because if atheists are saying we haven't rejected God, but we simply don't worship, and of the God forms that we know about, we wouldn't be able to worship that kind of God form. I'm not sure how the Christian could be upset with that.
I Do you want us to comment on that?
Well,
I see a
sure,
long pause.
sure.
Caleb, do you have a response for that? I don't know if that was supposed to be responded to.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a response to that.
Okay, well, it may not be what you expected us to say. Because what I am, so let me just make it easier for you. I am an anti-theist. I'm not just an atheist. Um, I don't argue as an anti-theist most of the time, but I'm 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 all the way dial cranked all the way to the edge. So not only am I not convinced that there's a God, which by the way is what I mostly argue, but I don't actually believe that there is a God. In fact, I would positively assert that I think there is no God. Um, I could be wrong about that, but that's I would have a debate where I positively asserted that, and I would try to win. I'd probably lose, but I that's what I believe. And as and that's not just the extent of my anti-theism. Of the God forms that I know about, I don't like them. Uh, Now, that said, I don't know how much you should read into that because I've talked to a lot of Christians, and you know what a lot of Christians say when they hear me say that I don't like the God that I know about. After they know something about the God that I know about, they say I don't like that God either. So that shouldn't be such a strange thing to your ear. I'm sure that there are some God forms that you Christians have heard that you wouldn't like very much. So I have simply not been presented with a God that I could worship. And so I don't feel like that means that I have rejected God. And if there is a God and he is very different from the way Christians have described him, I'm open to getting to know the guy or gal or the it. Um, so I don't understand the knee jerk reaction uh, that we get from some Christians when we say we wouldn't worship, because that's a kind of a natural thing. Of course, we wouldn't worship some God that we think is evil, and of course, we wouldn't worship some God that we don't know. And by definition, if a God showed up, he's clearly a God that we don't know.
So maybe you can help me with this question then. And this goes back to our original question for this episode. So I'm something I didn't see in the blog that I maybe you can put it together for me is I'm not seeing much of a rational reason behind not worshiping a god. So I'm seeing a lot of emotional reason. Well, I don't know that God and I don't like that God, but I'm not seeing kind of the rational piece. Maybe you can help me understand that because I'm sure you believe you have rational reasons for not worshiping any deity, but help me with that.
Okay, sure. I think the two reasons that you gave are rational. I think it would be, for instance, irrational to worship someone you don't like. So that in fact I think it would be impossible. Um, and so that is very rational. And I don't know him is also a rational reason because you can't worship someone you don't know. You can't love someone you don't know. So those just as a matter of rationality, it's an irrational statement to suggest that you could worship a God that you didn't like or didn't know. That said, um, other rational reasons why I wouldn't worship is I don't understand the point of worship. So it's not been expressed to me in any way that makes sense why I should worship. Now, you can express to me in a way that makes sense why I should be grateful for a good deed, because I'm grateful now to many people for good deeds. The course of my life, the many good things that have happened in my life, I can trace to individuals, and I'm very grateful to them for this day. I don't worship them, and so I think that you would have to maybe draw the line and connect the dots for me and tell me why I should worship and give me some rational reason for that. But I think that not worshiping is the default position. That's the null position. And I'm not entirely sure, A, what how I get from gratitude to worship, and B, what the being I'm supposed to be worshiping gets out of it.
Well,
It
gratitude is worship, isn't it? But I mean, being
well, no,
grateful
I'm
is
grateful.
part
I'm grateful
of
to
it.
you for being on the show, but I assure you, I'm not worshiping you.
That's a part of worship. I'll take it. It's the utilitarian aspect of it. Again, what does it serve? It seems like a non-value added activity most of the time, and it's so repetitive. If you just take the kind of praisey bit and adoration part of it, it's like, we get it. Thanks for life. It's like, I can't, as I was saying yesterday, I just can't muster the enthusiasm the whole time to get overly excited about all of it. Sure, if I had a gun to my head and somebody said, this is it, you'd really suddenly appreciate life a lot more. But the day to day, just to be constantly fawning over, oh, you're so big and you're so, partly you're just actually describing God, and it's his ontology. And I don't know why you should worship something just for the characteristics it's got, like you're so big and so everlasting and you are pure love and stuff like that, because it's like, well, those are just the attributes you have. You didn't work for them, you didn't strive for them, they're just bestowed on you, or you have them. And so I don't understand why we have to be that grateful. It's like when people, you don't constantly thank your parents for loving you if you've got vaguely normal parents. We're not sitting like, oh, this is amazing, these parents love their children, this is so good, there's such gratitude for this. It's like, it's kind of a thing. If you make kids, you're going to like them. That's what you hope happens. And so it's the same with God. I never understood why we had to be so thankful to him. It's like, I didn't ask to be here. He's just popped us on this planet, and now I have to thank him constantly for this. It didn't make any sense. It didn't seem to add any value to anything or serve any purpose. And I didn't gain anything from it. So after a while, as a human, you kind of are going to give up on the endeavor.
I think that's the best speech of the day. Maybe the two of you, possibly three. Let's see who pops up.
Ooh, we got Bryan.
Hey,
Hey, you've been invoked a few times on the show, British Petroleum.
in a good way or a bad way?
In the
As
way
God,
that
as
British
God himself.
Petroleum is invoked. So, yeah, maybe it would be helpful if you Christians would give us the rational reason to worship. Because, Darren hasn't had a crack at this particular answer. Maybe Bryan, be interesting to see what Bryan says, cold, having missed out on all the conversation. But Kaleb was just asking me to provide rational reasons why I didn't worship. He said he read my blog post and he didn't see any rational reasons. He did cite that I thought that that God was, maybe an evil God, or that, that it was just emotional reasons. And I was pointing out to Kaleb, well, no, those are rational reasons. You simply cannot actually worship from the heart someone that you think is evil. And what was the other point that you had brought up, Kaleb?
Yeah, don't like and don't know were the two
Right, you
things
don't
we
know.
talked
You
about.
cannot worship someone you don't know. Not from the heart. You have to get to know them. And so those are rational reasons. And I was just explaining that, not worshiping is really the null position, and what we lack are reasons to worship. And so I was hoping that the Christians might be able to make a case for why we should worship. And I think that Sarah just made the best point of the day. Sorry you missed it. Go back and listen to the podcast. It was fantastic. But before you giving it back to Kaleb, and I've been really enjoying the conversation with these two, by the way. Maybe Bryan, you want to chime in with? Do you have a rational reason for not worshiping? Is it all emotional?
Absolutely not, right? I mean, why would I worship if I don't have to? Why would I worship if there's no value in doing it to me? Why would I worship if the being that I'm worshiping doesn't particularly care whether I worship or not? So you've got to actually give me the impetus for why I'm worshiping. I don't just default go around start worshiping everything, right? So, in the absence of an impetus, why would I worship? So until you come to the table with that, I'm just not worshiping, not because I'm refusing, not because I'm trying to be difficult. It's because I don't worship as a default. So come to me with the reasons to worship. I'll evaluate them and then I'll go forward.
Darren, did you want to respond to that before Kaleb takes the mic?
Yeah, I just don't see the point in worshiping something that doesn't exist. Until you can demonstrate that a God actually exists, then arguing about which way the unicorn horn spirals doesn't really matter because you haven't demonstrated the unicorn exists.
So Kaleb, maybe you could give us some sense. I know that you've heard and probably delivered many sermons on worship and why we should worship. Actually, I have too. So I could put my Christian hat on.
I
This is
haven't
not my
done any.
Christian
They
hat.
won't let me near a pulpit. So,
Oh well, I think you'd enjoy it. But I want to know why you and Russell would argue positively that people should worship, because I think that the unified thing that we've got from the skeptics on the panel is we don't actually see the point of it. Even if God were real and did all the things that he did, that doesn't inspire worship per se. And I don't really understand moving from gratitude to lifelong worship.
okay. And that's fair. I think everybody's raised some very fair points, and I can appreciate them each in terms of where you're coming from. For me, I think one way that is helpful of understanding this, and I want to be clear, this separates out some of the aspects we've talked about in terms of love and coming from the heart. I don't believe that is fully incorporated in this analogy I'm going to use. But I still think it's a fair analogy in the sense of who God is. So from a business perspective, if you will, if someone is the boss and you blatantly ignore the orders that they give you, then you're not going to last very long at that job. Now, you've accepted the job. You're the one who's decided to work there. If you decide to ignore the boss, you ignore the boss and you're going to be fired for that. It seems to me irrational, at least as a Christian, to reject worship in any sense if it's a rejection of what the boss's plan is for the company. If this is the policy, if this is how things are supposed to be done, I can either quit or I can follow and toe the line. Those are kind of my options here. Now, if I toe the line, I may be able to get to a point where I'm on board with this company's goals. Maybe I don't understand everything. Maybe I develop a relationship. Maybe I advance in the company, that sort of thing. And maybe that relationship does get closer and I become a part of that work family, if you will. But for me to outright not follow the orders given, it doesn't seem like a rational choice.
But what happens if you're in that company and you're working hard and you're doing all those things and you're praising the boss and you're not progressing and nothing's changing and you actually feel like you're teleworking at home? Sorry, that's the French word, we call it télétravail, remote working on your own at the end of the day, and then you actually invented this company and it's not really there and nothing's actually changed as a result of it. Then what? That's where we're all at. That's the problem.
Right.
That's why it gets, we've all done the worshipping and sat down, closed our eyes and tried to concentrate on God and told that we'll be communing with him, and he doesn't turn up. You do that week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out. After a few decades, you start getting a little bit, a bit concerned that the others there, they're all in this state of ecstasy, that you're somehow missing out, and that it's not making any difference, and it's totally non-value added activity. And we are just human at the end of the day. We aren't going to keep banging our heads against the wall when something doesn't yield any results. That's as simple as that. You have to give up at some point. And that's
Right.
what we did. We didn't reject God. We just like, he's not there. We've tried this scenario, and we're not the only ones. And it's a relief to find other people that are in that boat. And you're not the only one that just wasn't getting anything out of it. I can't keep mustering up the enthusiasm to be grateful and amazed by God the whole time, when essentially he's dislocated and nebulous sort of idea that you can't quite get to know anyway, and seems full of contradictions, and never mind the evidence and all that. But it's difficult to pin down. There's nothing, you're not really knowing in the person, or dealing with them, or you're not.
I can definitely empathize with that. And I think it goes back to the question of whether it's true or not. And I can see, it came to a different conclusion on that. But I think that's what it goes back to, is whether or not it's true. If it's true, regardless of how it makes us feel, it may be the right thing to do to stay in that job. If it's not true, then I completely agree. And I understand that's the conclusion you've reached about it.
Caleb,
Which is fine
Caleb,
if God is
Yeah.
is a universalist God, because that's how I would view it. I don't think he's particularly bothered about worship and whether we're turning up every week on a Sunday and lip syncing or singing for real or whatever it is. It would make him an absurd God, because some of us have come to that conclusion and just thought, well, okay, feel free to come and knock on the door, but I'm not seeing it, and I've tried. So, I don't believe in any sort of hell punishment, because I think it would make the God a monster and absurd for people like ourselves that we tried. We did, I had no reason to not believe it. I was brought up in it. It was life. It was the way the world was. So there was nothing particularly to question. It's when you do question, you do look at the Gospels and you do think, it's not that great. What, the brother didn't believe him, and they're all pretty doubtful when he gets raised from the dead and all that kind of stuff. And no, he doesn't call himself God until much later Gospels. Mark doesn't mention him as any sort of deity, and so I don't know. I think it's rational to think it's probably not the case, and then you join that with lived experience, and you sort of think, yeah. I think I was talking to the wall, which isn't very nice, but you have to suck it up, I guess.
A lived experience definitely doesn't always help.
Caleb, if I could jump back in your analogy, I don't see a corollary between me choosing of my own free will to join the company and what God in this life is like. I didn't opt into existence. He made me without my consent. Is there a way that I can opt out of this game where I don't have to choose whether to worship or not? Can I opt out? Can I quit the company? How do I do that?
Jonah tried, and he got swallowed up by a whale. That was the problem. That's the thing. We don't even get to opt out of the game, as you say. You don't even get that choice. You can't just say, look, I don't even know, and I just, whatever, you want to play this fantasy game of heaven and hell and future lives and all the rest of it, can I just please opt out?
Yeah,
You don't even get that choice.
Which is particularly pernicious when you have hell and eternal torment for all eternity as part of the results.
Yeah. Which is why that's the first thing to go when you first give it any thought at all. It's just not anything that can be logically true. It just can't be. So once that's out of the picture, it makes the whole Jesus sacrifice a bit pointless. Plus, there was never an Adam and Eve story anyway. So if you want to sort of pitch God as some sort of the cosmic Christ inviting all of creation into some sort of communion, I can get behind that idea. But I'll leave the worshipping for the next life because I can't muster up the enthusiasm this time round.
So
I've got stuff
I
to
was
do.
hoping that we could get some of Sarah's concern addressed here too. I also wanted to say I thought it was a great point about lived experience. Everyone except for the heathen Darren, our lived experience is that of worshipers, and we were the people trying to reach God. We were calling out to God, literally on at times on our knees. We were um, we were doing that, and we did not get whatever we thought was supposed to be satisfaction. We didn't get it, um, and at some point, it does become reasonable to say this thing that I've been taught certain expectations, and then when those expectations aren't met, then I am justified in saying, well, maybe I was wrong, and I need to do something else. So the thing that I was hoping to get Christians to comment on with Sarah's point is what about this whole continual eternal keep worshiping thing? I mean, why isn't it we throw God a big worship party and we do that one time and then we get on with our lives? Why do we have to keep doing it over and over and over again? And why would we want to keep doing it in heaven for eternity? That was part of Sarah's concern, and my concern is, why does God want it? Because if once again, theologically speaking, this is not a God that is indifferent toward worship. He demands worship. And
He
so
made angels.
I don't understand
That's
what
all
he,
that's all they do,
you know,
the angels,
why
from what I gather.
why can't there be a little bit more of a reasonable type of worship, what I call it, and why does God even want it? So those are questions I want to put out there. I'll go ahead and mute myself again.
So let me throw this out there, and it's one of the reasons I use the work analogy, is that I think to say that this kind of one definition of worship as being a constant kind of adoration, I think it's too narrow, especially when we look at a Christian view of the afterlife. It's one that includes work. So I see worship as a job, if you will, not a bad job, but a job in terms of the things that God has for me to do now or in the next life are ones that are like a work activity. Work is good for people in most situations. It's something that gives motivation and meaning. And I think I relate worship a lot to work. I know that would rub some Christians the wrong way because they see it as work, but work is not a bad thing in the way I'm discussing it here. It gives meaning and purpose, jobs to do that are we're given jobs to do that are under the authority and direction of this higher being. So, that's one reason I use the boss analogy, is if, we are continuing to do things that are in line with expectations for how things are to run, that's part of what we're given. Being made in God's image, I think, is more of a job description in the sense of we've been given purpose than it is necessarily directly related to anything physical about us. Does that kind of answer the question?
So I get what you're saying. You're saying it's kind of in the next. I mean, it's particularly scary about the next life. It's going to be a job but it's for our benefit. So is it really for our benefit, or is it because we need to bless God with it? I've never understood what is the point of this worship, because we'll get there and surely we'll see that God doesn't need this worship. I mean, does he have to suck the worship up to keep going? I mean, what he doesn't need it. So why are we doing this work? We wouldn't feel very fulfilled by it because there's no purpose to it. Secondly, that's what a third of the angels in heaven would disagree with you. They didn't find it particularly fulfilling as a thing to do. They went off with the other guy, if you believe that story. That's a bit of a concern to me. I was a believer and was when I was one. And just like, I knew heaven was going to be boring, full of songs, lots of singing, really not very appealing. So I don't know how your analogy works with that. It's obviously not that great a work to be done if a third disappear off at the slightest sniff of a rebellion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair criticism. I want to give anybody else a chance to jump in here, though.
Well, I'll go ahead. Here, let me give you my camera. All right. I find the work analogy a little disturbing, actually. I've heard this sort of analogy before, though, so you're not inventing something particularly monstrous here, Caleb. But I always found that one to be pretty disturbing for some of the reasons that Sarah mentioned. I work right now, but as the song, the Big Rock Candy Mountain, there's a line in there about hanging the jerk who invented work. I agree with that. Work, the kind of work that we do, that we think of as work, was a punishment in the myth. It wasn't a good thing. It was a terrible thing. So before the sin, the things that humans had to do wasn't really much of what you would call work. And if what you mean by work is things that we want to do anyway that fulfill us, great. I would put that as some category other than work. But if you're thinking in terms of punching a clock, and this is your labor and God is your supervisor, and your work, your job is to praise God, that kind of takes away from the aspect of it being genuine praise and worship, because this is my job. So I have trouble wrapping my head around eternal worship as a job. I think I would rather be handed a sword and told your job is to fight demons for all eternity. And I'm not a soldier. I'm not a fighter. I'm a podcaster, not a fighter. I would take up the sword. if I had a choice, because the work that you're telling me that I'm supposed to be doing for all eternity makes me not want to go there.
Darren would have just thought he's woken up in one of his actual computer games if he did that.
Well, yeah, but I'm not sure that I would enjoy the whole fighting thing. Now, if I was playing a video game about fighting demons and God was cool with that being work, that'd be more my style.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm thinking that you couldn't die, so it would be like a video game.
Right, but how much pain is involved as you get stabbed and chopped up and beheaded and drawn and quartered and burnt? Because my games include spells that burn.
Yeah, but Darren, think of the songs that would be sang in your honor.
I can make
by
those
the, by the
without having
people
to
who
actually
are
fight.
working as songwriters. Look, I'm making light of this, Caleb, but do you kind of see where did Bryan go, for Pete's sake?
He left.
So do you see that objection at all, Caleb, or does that ring hollow for you?
No, I hear what you're saying, and I definitely think all these criticisms are fair. I'm not saying they aren't fair at all. I think there's another way to look at work too, though, that is both, and maybe this is because I'm too sucked into the work government system, all that good stuff. But I see that there are ways to work that are both fulfilling for me as well as fulfilling both a greater purpose and a purpose to the people I serve, more importantly. So, my public service to people, even though I'm receiving a reward in return, it is certainly something that I can find great joy in. So I see where you're coming from. But again, I think it's bringing in this other aspect of worship, which is that love and heart piece that, like I said, it's important, but I don't think it gives us the full picture. And I'll be honest, I've taken jobs where my heart's not in it until a year and a half later, or maybe it's never in it at all, and that's happened too. But I think there is a way that a balance could be struck with this.
Right? But in heaven, will anyone ever really need to be helped? And if they do, can't God just snap his fingers and help them? I mean, doesn't that make your efforts pretty much pointless, sort of like digging a hole and filling it back in?
Well, assuming that the Christian God is real, is that how he handles things here on earth?
Right, but but that still reflects here on Earth. I mean, given that God could just snap his fingers and make it better, isn't your work just pretty much digging a hole and filling it in?
But that
And then
doesn't
people are suffering because he refuses to act?
that doesn't appear to be the way that, if he exists, that he actually answers things. He uses people, he uses circumstances to
No, I understand that point. I'm just pointing out that that's actually the problem.
right. I don't agree that I agree that there's a problem there, that's possible, but I'm not sure that it's one that I can relate to.
All right. Well, okay.
But
So let
what
me
sort
help you
of
relate. The homeless person that you pass on the way to work. I know that you have the heart of a person who wants to help. It probably breaks your heart if you're not just annoyed like me. Because if you live in New York or you work in New York, every time you come out of Penn Station, you got to literally step over the beggars. I'm not inclined at all to give any money to any of them. But outside of that situation, your heart probably breaks that you can't do something meaningful to affect those lives. But your God could. But your God wants you to figure it out. And you don't even know the right answer as to what to do. Should you give him the $3 you got in your pocket? Should you go to the cash machine and give him $300? Should you take him into your home? Should you give him the phone number to a carriage? You don't even know what to do, but he just wants you to do something when he could do something. And that gets to what Darren was saying. That feels a lot like digging a hole and filling in the dirt just to give you something to do. That's
And
ultimately kind of meaningless.
what's worse is the person is actually homeless just to give you make work. So what if you were the homeless guy and you were the example God was using for other people? I mean, how crappy is that?
Right. No, I see where you're coming from there. I think there's also a place, though, where when I delegate things to employees, I delegate things that oftentimes would be very easy for me to do and not take very long, but I want them to be a part of that work with me. I want them to have a chance to develop skills and learn and grow in some way. So I delegate those things, even though I could instantly take care of it. I would rather help that person with personal growth and be involved in their life in that way,
Except you
rather
can't.
than
Except you can't take care of it, because if you took care of everything, you literally don't have enough time in the day to take care of everything. So you actually need these people to do that. You have a need. God doesn't actually have that need.
okay, that's fair.
And I would also ask as we wrap this up to maybe if you could address the other kind of elephant in the room that we skeptics have all kind of expressed a concern about. Um, Even those of us who were Christians, which is, what does God get out of worship? Why does it's the James T. Kirk Star Trek Five question. Why does God need a starship? Why does God need a worshiper? We are clearly lesser beings. So, for instance, how important would an earthworm's worship for you be? It just wouldn't be important. And so it's not like God created equals and they worship. We're lesser beings. What does he get out of it? None of us are able to express in any way that makes sense what we think God gets out of it and why he wants us to worship. And maybe you guys can address that for
And
us,
why
at
he
least a
doesn't
little bit.
already have enough of it with all the creatures he created to do only that job in heaven, or the angels, and he just has them worship him all the time. That's just a bit weird. I mean,
And
why?
Yeah, there's the six cherubim. There's this image in Revelation where there are two that are around him, and all they do is say, "You are holy, holy art thou." That sort of thing. That's their whole job. Um,
Not non-value
yeah,
added job.
my
right.
my
So what?
answer is very
Why?
short. My answer is very short. I don't think God needs any of it. I think God is completely self-sustained. I think that most likely we probably get far more out of it than he does. I don't think he needs anything from us. And that includes worship. He is a self sustaining being. So I suspect in his grand purposes that it is something that is much more of a benefit to us than providing any kind of superficial benefit to him because he has no need for it.
And we
So he
request
demands that
a
we worship him because he loves us, but you also haven't provided us with any reason why it's good for us. And
well,
that's
and if it is for our benefit, can we ask for a different benefit? Because I'd much rather take, you know, eradication of all diseases, perhaps getting rid of natural disasters, um, you know, things like that over, you know, whatever help people get from worship. I mean,
It's interesting because I think that is ultimately what comes out of it.
no, telling someone someone's great doesn't cure disease.
Yeah.
Right. I
Ultimately.
think we're talking about the difference between immediate actions and consequences and the ultimate view of the Christian view that ultimately the problem of evil is solved.
No, it's not solved.
yeah. I mean, if what you're saying, I mean, just try draw a line for me between these two things. Go to church every Sunday and sing "How Great Thou Art," um, and we're literally telling Jesus, "You're great." Draw a line between that and um, disease being cured. If the line you draw is because we're focused, we're constantly reinforcing to ourselves that God is good, that we will then do more good, and that more good will be done, then we didn't actually need God for that at all, because ultimately we're the ones doing the good, and we could be motivated by something else. So I'm missing the connection between us on our knees and good things happening in the world.
Well, it's back to that priority thing, isn't it? If you prioritize God, i.e., worship, that's my definition of it, then you would take on some of the. Well, yeah, he uses you as his hands and feet, is the way the saying goes.
Yeah,
So
but we
you
could
would
we
go
could
off
cut
and
out
just.
the middleman though, Sarah, if we just prioritized ending world hunger.
Well, that's why I think
And
loving kindness works. That's
right, but
why
we
any
don't have to
act.
spend a second on our knees to
No, I
prioritize
don't
world
think you do.
hunger.
Right. Right. But
I
loving and
think that you
kindness
do.
comes from brain chemistry, not from a God. So we don't actually need the worship of God to get loving and kindness.
No, exactly. I don't. But I think that's what the functional God that Jordan Peterson talks about is the only one I can sort of get an idea behind.
So
But he's not a real God as such.
let's wrap our minds around some closing comments. Russell, we'll get you Christians in there last so that you have a little bit more time to think about what you want to say. And to be fair to Sarah and to Darren, I will go first, so that by the time Caleb finishes it off, everyone will have forgotten what I said anyway. So the order will be me, Sarah, Darren, David, Caleb. And take as much time as you need to close. This is a time when you get to bloviate uninterrupted. And so, also, those who follow a person closing, don't use your closing comment to try to dispute what the other person said. These are not really arguments. These are your closing thoughts. So, as you put those together, I want to start by saying I appreciate the discussion. I do appreciate the discussion. It's not apparent when we're on the show and we're in the middle of a melee. But first of all, it's just fun at a visceral level. But second of all, it's very thought provoking. And I appreciate the people who participate in the arena. It's sport, but it's more than sport, and I certainly get a lot out of it. And so I want to thank Russell for showing up today, and glad that you were able to come. Didn't have a work emergency or anything like that. And thanks for bringing Caleb along. As I've been wanting to have more conversation with Caleb anyway. And Caleb, I hope you'll come back to the show. That I mean quite genuinely. So worship, why isn't it for me? Well, I don't know that I have much more to say on it. We have to do this hypothetical of if God showed up in a way that convinced us, because it hasn't happened in reality. So I hate the fact that we have to have this conversation this way. I would much rather have a conversation about why I reject God or don't reject God. After he has shown up, I know who he is, he's made his offer, he's offered his terms. I think we could still have that conversation. After all, the devils believe and tremble. But they also have chosen to reject God. They are beings that have honestly rejected God. That would be an interesting conversation. But we have to do this hypothetically, because we have not been presented with a God in a way that convinces us. Now, I know Christians are saying, well, it's God has presented himself in a way that you should have been able to get your mind around. That was pretty much Russell's argument last week when we talked about the hiddenness of God. If you don't see God, that must be on you, because God has showed himself sufficiently. But I can tell you the inner workings of my own heart wasn't sufficient for me. It may have been sufficient for Russell. Maybe God likes Russell better. And he made sure he showed up in a way that Russell wouldn't have any serious doubts. But he didn't do that for me. He left me guessing. He left me drowning in doubt. So it wasn't, I don't get a chance, in fact, to say why I have rejected God. I have never rejected God. I reached out to God for the vast majority of my life. And I feel like God has rejected me. If there is a God, he rejected me. He made it very clear that my life and time was wasted reaching out to him. For whatever reason, I was not made to be one of those jars of honor, but a chamber pot. That's how he made me. That's how it's going to be. Okay, Fine, I accept that. But I'm not the one who rejected God here. You would be shocked and appalled, maybe even embarrassed by some of the things that I've done in my life to reach out to this God. So I don't accept in any way the criticism that I'm rejecting God. That's bullshit. It's insulting, and you don't know what you're talking about. So we do, in fact, have to have this conversation this way as a hypothetical. Because we didn't get knocked on our ass when we were on our way to Damascus. We weren't good enough. We weren't important enough to God. The people that were important enough to God, God showed up for. He didn't give a damn whether we follow him or not. Because we know what God does for people that he gives a damn about. At least according to the story, if you want to buy it. And we're told by the Christians that, we have to assume that the story is real. Okay, great. Then he didn't give a damn about us because we know what it looks like when he cares to show up. This is a God who knows how to show up. So here we are. And I am left to answer hypothetically whether I would worship a God who showed up. And in my mind, I think the question is tainted because I can only picture this God who chose not to show up. And you're still asking me if I would worship him. Hell no. Sarah.
Wow, I'm gonna have to follow that. Okay. I think from our discussion, I think it's fair to say that worship is a word that's a little bit difficult to define always, and it means different things to different people. And I do think some of the definition is important. It isn't just what we understood it to be. I think when we picture worship, we mean the kind of adoration, singing praises type thing. But I think it could mean more to do with prioritizing God in your life. When you ask Christians why, they sort of flip-flop between God doesn't need it, but then he's worthy, so it means that you should. And that, it sort of seems to bless God. There's something in the Bible about our praises. God becomes enthroned on our praises, that kind of thing. So it seems to serve a purpose, but I don't even know what that really concretely means. It doesn't. They're all very, very vague notions. And ultimately, it's a bit like, well, he's worthy and you're a stinking wretch. So please get on your knees and praise him. That's what you are made to do. I do have time for worship in the sense of right priority of practicing gratitude, because we know from studies that a practice of gratitude is one way to happiness. So I think I can get behind that idea, or mindfulness and being still, like Kaleb said at times. I think David Russell said about being quiet at times and thinking, and taking the focus off ourselves. I could see it has a use for building community, bringing people into unity, but I think these are all human concepts and constructs. And I think as ever, it overpromised. It said that, when you worship, you draw close to God. He'd be there with you. You could commune with him. He would transform you. And I just didn't find any of that to be the case. So at the end of the day, if it's no bother to him because he doesn't need it, I'm going to step out and not do this non-value added activity for much longer. And that's what I did. And it didn't seem to have too much of a negative impact so far. That's me.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest problem with this idea of worship is that before you can even get to the idea of the determination of whether you'll worship someone or something, you first have to actually demonstrate that they exist. I mean, we sort of assume they exist that God existed for this conversation. And as David pointed out, that's kind of a problem because we had to assume that he exists. We didn't actually know that he exists. We couldn't point to specific attributes that the God actually had. We were just sort of assuming he had specific attributes. And so as much as I enjoyed this conversation and I enjoyed talking with David Russell and Kaleb, it was mostly just fan fiction. Seeing what we would do in some alternative reality. And I think partly for me, the biggest problem is that I've seen a lot of other religions. It seems like I've read hundreds of different religious texts, although I'm guessing it probably hasn't been that much. But they all have stories of people being born of the gods, or being incarnations of the gods, of doing miracles, of doing heroic deeds, bringing knowledge or some other thing of value to their people, protecting them, and some even have more evidence to support their stories than Christianity does. I'm thinking of the Egyptian religion in particular. I mean, they actually have mummies of the people that the stories say talk to the gods directly. Christianity doesn't even have that. So when we're talking about worship, we first have to demonstrate that the unicorn actually exists. And then we have to determine what this unicorn actually is. What is its attributes? How does it act? What does it do? And if this world is an accurate representation of what this God does, i.e. nothing, when disease or natural disasters or rape or anything else happens, then I think that says a lot about the personality of this being. And I don't know how you can worship someone that obviously just doesn't care about humanity. I mean, people can say whatever they want. The holy books can say that he loves us, but when it actually comes to actions, when it comes to the real world and real people hurting and suffering and dying, he does nothing. He just sits back and watches. And you can say that, well, God must have his reasons, but the only reasons I can think of doing that are horrible reasons. So sure, he may have his own reasons, but that itself reflects on his personality, his character. And I just don't know how you could worship a being like that. And any being that's not watching, who's maybe like a deist god, who just set things in motion and moved on, well, he doesn't really care about it being worshipped. He may not even know that we exist. So worshiping him would be pointless. And so that's where I'm left at.
I guess it's me now, huh? You letting Kaleb finish? All right. Well, I've heard a lot today, and although I really sympathize with my skeptic friends here, I obviously leave without too much of agreement here. We disagree on a lot of things. I think Sarah hit the nail on the head when it came to examining the many different aspects of worship, and I think there is many aspects to worship. Um, yes, I think David said it right, where there has to be a heart element involved with it. Uh, I heard a lot of objections, but I think they assume too little about humanity and too much about God. You know, I don't think I think we assume, because a lot of this discussion, it comes down to the hiddenness of God. I think David kind of geared it that way, that it was a piggyback off the hiddenness of God. And for one, I just think I think it's built off of too many assumptions about God. And I think we do need to break down the character of God, and we need to have answers, and we need to seek answers. I think that's part of worship as well, as seeking answers and seeking being beings of discovery. I think that is also a an act of worship. I didn't get to much to speak on this because it was at towards the end and Caleb was doing his thing. You guys can hear me okay, right?
Hmm.
All right, good, good. So yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, when they're talking about the afterlife and so forth, I just, I didn't get to, I caught, I guess, the tail end of it, and I don't know what the afterlife is gonna be. I don't know what it's gonna be like. I would assume that we still go through some sort of sanctification and grow closer to God as we go, but we also do the things that we do in this life that we love, such as gardening or discovering God in a new level of academia. I don't know, and all doing that is an act of worship. Would seem to me would be, um, but again, one has to assume that God is doing nothing. Darren was right when he said that we have to prove the existence of God first and stuff like that. I think that, you know, a lot of the times we want God to reveal himself the way we want him to reveal himself. And I think that's not what God wants. I don't think we can manipulate an omniscient being. And if we could, he wouldn't be an omniscient being. He wouldn't be an omnipotent being. He wouldn't be the triomnies. Okay. So I don't think that's what uh, we would like, even if we could get those desires fulfilled. I think we would actually find another way to complain. There's a lot of studies that humans believe what they want to believe, regardless of evidence. I've got 3 articles that I'm going to list in scientific studies that I'm going to list in Skeptic Seeker's blog. So you can follow that for more. And I'm going to give you uh, a blog in response to David's Hiddenness article that you can look more into. But basically, I don't think proper propositional knowledge of God is what his goal is. I think it's filial knowledge. I think he wants us to have a cognitively robust theism. So that's where I'll leave it today, and I'll hand it over to Caleb.
All right. So, regardless of what's been said here today, I have a strong belief that we are all worshipers in some sense. And this comes largely down to how you define worship and what we're talking about there. And I think there are multiple levels of worship, adoration, uh, modeling our lives after someone. And I think that if there is a supreme being that exists, regardless of who that being is, then they are the ultimate being in existence, and we should follow, worship, and mold our being after them. We have no greater goal we could seek to achieve if this is the most supreme being in existence. And if they're not the most supreme being in existence, then they're not God. So I think worship is a part of us all, and it's where we set that standard of our highest level of worship. Do we put it on family? Do we put it on money? Do we put it on friends? Do we put it on the most meaningless pleasures in life? That's a choice we get to make. And I think Christianity offers a solution to that, where we do see the supreme being. Not only that, but he's one that has humbled himself to come to earth. And Jesus was offered as a sacrifice to ultimately pay the price and give us a humanly example to look to, this being, to see what he is like. And so I'm not going to convince everybody I empathize with all the points raised here today. I certainly understand and would love to get to understand even more, because I still fail to see it being a rational argument against worship of a supreme being. I'd love to explore that more as the weeks go on, because I do want to understand that perspective. But the arguments still fall and seem to be largely emotional in terms of rejecting due to uh, not knowing or not liking this being. regardless of what that ultimate being is like. So I can certainly empathize with things, but I don't see that we have a better answer for the fact that ultimately, if there's a supreme being, this is what we should direct our lives towards in terms of personal growth. To do anything less would be to set stagnant. And I don't believe that there's anybody who in a right mental state wants to set in a stagnant spot within life. I think they want to direct themselves to doing more and being better. And ultimately, this being is the model for that. Yeah, little convoluted, but that's what I got.
Thank you very much. You really should reconsider the pulpit. You've got a good voice for it. You've got the right patter, as they would call it. You've got the right look for it. You've got a thing that people would listen to. You should look into that.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and trust me, I've listened to hundreds of preachers, most of them very bad, very bad. I would listen to you. So, folks, that's it. Teddy has been back channeling me during this podcast, trying to lobby for an additional one-on-one talk between me and her, because she is convinced that the Christians on this show will not grill me properly. And so she is convinced that a more proper grilling is necessary. So
I'll be the moderator for that.
I bet you would. That show is probably not going to happen. That said, I don't mind doing shows with Teddy. Tying her down to actually do a show that's actually harder than getting her to than you might think. So yeah, plenty of shows that she'd like to do in the moment. If that show doesn't happen, it's probably not because of me, audience. But just know that there is lobbying in the background for more of this conversation. If you would like to hear more of this conversation, and if you would like to see me get a proper grilling, you can say so in the comments. skepticsseekers.squarespace.com. Kaleb, where can people find your work?
Yeah, so I help co-host a couple of shows. So first place they can go is Question Christianity on YouTube. We have discussions over there and welcome anybody to come be a part of these. Also over on The Mentionables on YouTube. Can find me there.
And Russell, where else can you be found besides Skeptics and Seekers?
Proselytize or apostatize. We actually have a debate live tonight, so I will be discussing is Easter pagan, because last week I had this wonderful discussion and my mic was muted the entire time. So, well, the software actually just didn't recognize it. But yeah, we're gonna redo it, and it's gonna be an awesome conversation. So join us tonight at around 7.
Okay, I know that Darren is doing gaming things. In fact, he's probably playing a game right now. This is actually a digital image of Sarah. She's on the Alps skiing right now. That's where you can find them. Good luck. I am just at Skeptics and Seekers these days, although Sarah did mention in an email that there's some interesting things going on the Unbelievable podcast. Just give them a shout out. There's still some good conversation that goes on there. So even if you don't listen to the show, Premier's Unbelievable, they still have an audience and a discussion board. And you can say that this show, Skeptics and Seekers and the blog, was born from the discussion board of that show. And so if you want to see what gave us birth, check out Unbelievable. They may be a shadow of their former self, but I think they're still good conversation to be had, and I would like to see that continue next week. Next week, there's a reason why I have not talked about what's coming up next week, because I have no idea. No idea. But we'll figure out before next week is over. So till then, thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.
Can you feel